The Houston Texans may have an issue on their hands. No Christian Kirk and Braxton Berrios possibly for Sunday's matchup. Is there a big hole to fill? And if so, who will be that person? That conversation will be had with Brandon K. Scott of Sports Radio 610.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Better Red Nation, from H-Town to your town. Today's episode and every episode of the Locked On Texans podcast is for who? Texan fans all around, from Texas all the way up to L.A., which is where the Texans will be this Sunday afternoon. New listeners, thank you for stopping by. I want to take time to shout out the everydayers from the Himalayas, making the Locked On Texans your first listen of the day, and for continuing to give me a view or a ear, listening to me, your Texas Credential Media member and football analyst, John Hickman. Today's episode is all about any moment of clarity right now on Houston's chances to pull this victory off. And also we'll look at the fact that, hey, where does the worry lie for the Houston Texans right now? Not only going into the Week 1's matchup, but also just looking at their potential for the season. Let's talk about the offense, or maybe the lack thereof, now that we know that both Christian Kirk and Braxton Berrios is extremely doubtful for Sunday's matchup. But this conversation won't be had alone. I'll be having a conversation with a friend of mine, Brandon K. Scott. Welcome back to the show, brother.
Man, it feel like home, man. I appreciate you for having me back, and it's perfect timing with this season opener right ahead, and got a little issue here with the health of the offense. That's been a question for a while, so I'm ready to get into it.
Ready to get into it as well, man. So let's dive right into it. Christian Kirk, Braxton Berrios, two guys that are doubtful for Sunday's matchup. Afternoon game, so maybe because they don't play at noon, they play at afternoon. Maybe they get Houston an extra hour or two to evaluate. I'm not sure, just speculating, but let's talk about the offense right now. Without those two guys, do you feel like Houston's chances go down, or are you confident right now what you've seen from Nico, from the rookies, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, and Xavier Hutchinson, who's earned himself some love this preseason? How do you feel about the offense right now?
So I think it's a significant loss, John, honestly, to lose both. Like, if it was just one of them, I think it would be problematic enough because – one is particularly important in your special teams and your return game, and as a wide receiver in the case of Braxton Berrios, and of course with Christian Kirk, this is honestly your number two receiver. Forget whether he lines up in the slot or whether he's outside. Like, this is your number two receiver, your second best receiver, your most accomplished receiver, not named Nico Collins, that's on the team. And I was expecting him to be honestly a reliable safety valve, safety net, safety blanket, however you want to look at it, for CJ Stroud. And so the idea that Christian Kirk is not going to be there, somebody that you expected to be really, or expect honestly to still be really a key part of this offense, and then Braxton Berrios is supposed to be a key part in the return game and a depth piece in the offense. I think that those are significant losses in Week 1. Now, that being said, I don't think that it necessarily kills it hurts their chances because they got two less good football players. So, like, we can just do the basic math on that. In terms of how I view this game, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, I'm not sure that that's what's going to be what loses or wins them the game, right? A lot of this is going to be done in the trenches, and it's going to have to do with a lot of what we've heard Demeco Ryans talk about earlier in the week, which offensive line can hold up better against the opposing defensive line.
Or what he started talking about, depending on what side of the conversation you're on.
Exactly. So, but I do think that it's going to come down a lot to how things hold up in the trenches, and of course, when it comes to the offense, I do think where significant is that the Rams don't necessarily have a great secondary. It's not like that's what they're known for, and so you would expect CJ Stroud to be able to pick apart the secondary if the line is able to hold up against a formidable front, which the Rams do have. Now he has fewer options to get that done. It'll be interesting to see how he does it.
Yeah, I caught a little flack on social media today at the time of this recording. I said, man, John Metchie should still be a Texan. And when I said that, people pushed back. It was like, no. I'm like, guys,
you being messy. That's why they got on you, man. You being messy with that.
And I like to be messy. That's a part of my calling card. But honestly, two guys are not going to be out there potentially Sunday. Those are two bodies that, whether it's 20 yards for one and 45 for the other, that's two guys that has been around this offense. And so, like, now I look at this opening season, kind of a little bit of last opening season, when everything is happening, where will those bodies be? And for Houston, those bodies got hurt consistently throughout the year. So, but we know Minchie is in Philly right now. Moving on to the other side of the offense, or the other area for the offense, running the ball. No Joe Mixon to start the year off. Nick Chubb, Woody Marks, Damian Pierce. And you and I have had some conversation about Damian Pierce, what we viewed or the lack thereof. Where's your faith right now in that running back rooms?
So it's a lot more. I'm a lot more confident in the running backs than I was. And I think when we were having this conversation in person, John, you correct me if I'm wrong. This might have been at the Carolina practice. Might be the last time that joint practice that they had. That might be the last time that I saw you in person. But then that's definitely when we talked about this particular issue with the running back room, and me just not being impressed, I would even say more so underwhelmed overall by what I was seeing from the running back room at that time. But I have said this since then, both on the radio, on Sports Radio 610, and on my podcast, the B Block Podcast, that I felt better about it after watching it in some kind of game action since then.
Yeah.
So since you and I talked, right? They had the Panthers game. That was at the Panthers practice a couple of days before the Panthers game, right? And I thought that from what I saw from Nick Chubb, specifically from what I'm remembering from that game, and then even more so, maybe Woody Marks at the end, but even more so Woody Marks in the preseason finale, right, against the Lions. Between those two performances and actual game action, I feel a lot better watching them, or from what I've seen of what I've seen from them.
From the committee altogether, because from the committee, it'll be all hands on deck.
Correct. And specifically looking at for Chubb's part, the Panthers game, because he wasn't in the last one, and then for Woody Marks' part, more so that Lions game. When you bring them together, knowing that the idea is going to be a little Chubb, a little Marks, a little Damian Pierce as well, I can deal with that. I can deal with Damian Pierce in a committee. What you probably don't want right now, if we're being honest about it, you probably don't want either one of those guys, any of the three of those guys, Nick Chubb at this point in his career, Woody Marks as a rookie, and probably not Damian Pierce even even going into his fourth season. Probably don't want any of those guys to be your bell cow. You don't want them to fill the role that Joe Mixon filled for you last year, because that's just not a realistic ask right now for where those guys are in their career. But as a committee, as a group, you get some, he gets some, they get some, everybody gonna get some, and everybody kind of does something a little bit different. I know Damian Pierce and Nick Chubb are probably similar style players, but Woody Marks does something a little bit different from them, but also is able to run it through the tackles. I think he got probably unfairly characterized as like this maybe scat back or third down guy that you
yes, and I've had to walk that back a little bit. When we see pass catching running backs, we automatically assume scat back. But honestly, the runs that really impressed me was his first 12-yard carry and his touchdown run.
Yeah,
those are hard-fought yards, and he did it with ease in a sense. And of course, those are against backups or the Carolina Panthers defense. But
and honestly, if you go back and watch like him at USC and Mississippi State, there are signs that he's like that. He can do that, you know, like that's
very much so. He can run inside the tackles extremely well, which I think we've kind of downplayed here in Houston in terms of his running ability, which is what you want to see out of an NFL running back.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm feeling a lot better about it based off of what I've seen in game action. I want to caution myself sometimes as we have access to these practices, and they are valuable in learning about the team and learning about the tendencies and what they're trying to do. And of course, the availabilities when we're able to talk to them about what we're seeing, but to still not lean too much into it in the evaluation, since it's not game speed, it's not game action, especially some of those more physical positions. It's like, okay, they're not really tackling, so you don't have the greatest appreciation. It's easy to forget how hard it is to tackle Nick Chubb, right? Like that's a job, that's a task. And in practice, they're not asking you the same job. So yeah, I feel better, but I don't think any of those guys are, again, bell cows, but as a committee, I can live with it.
I do want to dive into more of your worries, and we can look at week one worries for the Houston Texans, whether or not they can come out on top, and also just the grand scheme of things for this team as they are in search of their first AFC Championship appearance. So when we come back, we got more Brandon K. Scott on the other side. We're talking Texans, and we're doing it the family way. Mazda craft cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow that move with them every time they drive. And that's what makes Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels like you're alive in every sense of the detail. Mazda offers more than safety. It's won more 2025 IIS Top Safety Pick awards than anyone else as of August 2025. As an athlete focuses on details, Mazda does the same, from metallic accents to hand-stitched Napa leather. Whether it's a quick drive to practice or a weekend trip, Mazda makes even everyday drives feel special. It's the small details that make the big plays, and just like there's more to every player, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Also, Texas fans, awesome opportunity to let you guys know that with the NFL season here, this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off big time. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in the fast way. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick, it's easy, and honestly my favorite way to follow along with football. I love checking projections like Josh Allen's more or less than 270 yards, or Saquon more or less than one rushing TD. They probably just gave y'all a good more or less stat projection to put some money on. So I would say go check it out. This week's max discount include Dak Prescott over more than or less than 0.5 passing yards. Lamar Jackson on Sunday, more or less on 0.5 passing yards. So I just kind of gave you guys 4 easy, quick cash ins right there on Prize Picks. So take advantage. Download the Prize Pick app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 off. Give you $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code Locked On NFL for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 play. Prospects, it's good to be right. Welcome back, listeners. Thank you to all of our Locked On guests, viewers, and everybody that's anticipating some Texan football this Sunday. Again, they'll be taking on the Rams, the 3:30 game on CBS. They have a great crew calling that game. But, K. Scott, man, it's been a while since you've been on the show, right? And when we get a chance to talk, we just really just have a good conversation about football, whether it's on the camera or off the camera. But for the listeners and viewers, tell us where your worry may lie right now with this team. Obviously, and I think you may poach at it, offensive line is a huge worry for the Houston Texans. Is it a worry for you right now as well, even with the additions and newcomers?
Yeah, so the offensive line is the most obvious one, but I've also been on record, man, of saying that I've started to talk myself into the offensive line. And since we were talking earlier about the running backs and how they sold me a little bit with their performances in the preseason, I do want to shout out the offensive line as well.
Yeah.
Because I thought they had some pretty good moments that surprised me a little bit, but also gave me some comfort in what the potential might be for this offensive line, what it might look like. So I think the offensive line is the obvious answer to this question, like just objectively, no matter like what, forget what my concern, your concern, any specific person's concern is. That is like the concern with the team, because that's the main question they need to answer in this off season. And so that's just going to be the case no matter what we think. And I would say I share some level of concern. All of us are going to be watching with a keen eye this offensive line for the entire season, I think. But I would go beyond that and just say, especially with this new development, John, of Christian Kirk and Braxton Berrios being out for the first game, and us anticipating that Jalen Noel, am I doing that right? Jalen Noel. Yeah. It's funny. I got it right, and it's been a while since I said his name, and so I went back to saying it wrong. But anyway, Jalen Noel from Iowa State, like we anticipate he's going to have a much larger role with those guys out in both ways. Like his
Special teams,
his ability to contribute in special teams in a way that you would expect Braxton Berrios to, and for him to play sort of that role that Christian Kirk would normally play. And of course, him and Christian Kirk and Braxton Berrios, all those guys are basically slotted as the slot guys anyway, in some order. So twofold with both of those guys out, you are going to be asking more of him. It did make me think of, are you going to be more reliant on rookies this year? Like, are you going to find yourself, I'll put it to you this way, or a different way. Are you going to be overly reliant on your rookies this year, more so than you were expecting? Which, look, might not be the worst thing in the world because
when was the last time they didn't heavily rely on their rookies?
That's what I'm saying though. They did the first year.
They had to
because they had to, because that was the new team. It worked out, and this was the point I was going to make. The fortunate part is, I feel good about these rookies, really good, and the fact that we've seen rookies have really good success, a lot of success with this team over the last several years. Like it's a team that has done well with rookies since Demeco got there, and even in that Lovey year, we saw some rookies really perform. So it's not like the worst thing in the world, but what I'm saying is it's not what I was expecting. It's not something that I would have predicted going in. I thought over time, right, once you bring in these young players over time, you're going to be less and less reliant on rookies because these guys are either getting older, or now that you're a better team, you're a double-digit win team in back-to-back years, been in the playoffs, won a game in the playoffs back-to-back years. Now you're going to become a more veteran team. You're going to become a team that does rely more on veterans, both because these rookies are now veterans and you're adding to the team, kind of like how they did last year.
Right.
I was viewing the rookies as more of a supplement to the team as opposed to this more heavily featured on the team, as they clearly will be. So I wasn't really necessarily expecting that, but to a man from Jaden Higgins, who is slotted as the starting receiver opposite Nico Collins, Jalen Noel, who is going to have, I think now, a more prominent role, an expanded and more prominent role with Christian Kirk and Braxton Berrios being out. Ariante Ursery, of course, is now the starting left tackle. Woody Marks is going to get carries. Is going to be a big part of this offense. And so now you go to a man, the rookie Jalen, Jalen
Reed, Jalen Smith, the cornerback.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, how close you are to having to rely on these cats, because we talk a lot about the lack of depth at the cornerback position. Who knows if that dude is going to have to play? So I'm just looking at the rookie class that I feel good about, and also feel good about the Texans' recent history with rookies. But I wasn't expecting to have to rely on those rookies as much as it seems like they might have to going into this season. So I am curious and a little bit concerned, a little bit worried about whether this team is going to be more reliant on rookies than I was initially expecting.
So I want to piggyback off that because of that point. Are you more confident in the guys that we are expecting to see because of the coaching on their respective sides of the ball this year? And to that point, I say last year, we clearly all kind of saw the debacle of the offense, whether it was the offensive line, whether it was the receivers not necessarily being impactful once everybody went down. But now, delete Bobby Slowick, insert Nick Caley, and we've had an opportunity to see his offense, whether it's been training camp, practice, OTAs, or more so preseason games. Do you feel more confident in guys like Noel and Higgins being contributors this year under Nick Caley compared to Bobby Slowick? Do you feel more confident in guys like Ariante Ursery because of the revamped offensive line from Cole Popovich taking over to an offensive scheme that kind of plays more so into their skill set? Are you more confident in those guys being productive players compared to if this was just like the same of last year, Houston would really be in some trouble? Because defensively, they still got Demeco on their side, so they'll figure it out.
Yeah, I do think that, let's say, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel will benefit as rookies being in this offense versus how Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie as younger players had to figure things out in Bobby Slowick's offense. Like if I had to compare the experiences, which one would I prefer if I was to put myself in the shoes? I would take the rookies of this year, their experience. Okay. I would prefer Ariante Ursery's experience of being in the Nick Caley offense and being coached by Cole Popovich versus, let's say, the situation that Blake Fisher was in last year or Drew Scruggs was in the year before that, being in the offense and under the offensive staff that they were under. I do think that all of the rookies, specifically on the offensive side of the ball that we're talking about, have a better shot under this current regime. If for no other reason, like we'll see if these guys are more competent than the guys that they're replacing. Like I'm not here to just assume that automatically, but I think just based off of the togetherness and cohesive nature, I don't think a lot gets, or maybe enough gets made of how a little bit thrown together the previous staff was, as opposed to how intentional this staff is. The connections, the alignment, the understanding, speaking the same language. And I'm talking from Cole Popovich as the offensive line coach all the way up to Nick Caley as the offensive coordinator, all the way up, honestly, to Nick Caserio as the general manager, and everybody just kind of thinking the same way.
You kind of look at this group of guys and just say, at the very least, there should be less confusion about what your role and what the expectation, and also how to execute those two. Yeah. Which for those two young men coming in, good point you pointed out, they have a little bit more on the past learning curve than John Mitchell and Xavier Hutchinson was at this point in their career. So I think I'm a fan of Nick Caley because I understand that week to week we'll look at something differently for the most part. Like what works will work, but it won't be something that the team is heavily relying on because week to week things changes. And I think we've talked about it in the past. Like Bobby Slowick just didn't do a good job of throwing counterpunches. What you see is what you got. And that also kind of led to the downfall of the offense.
Yeah, I mean, that's the dream, right? Is that Nick Caley, and I do anticipate this based off of how they talk about Nick Caley, and honestly, based off of how the guys that Nick Caley studied under, the background that he comes from, and I'm not just talking about the Rams, but more so even the Patriots, this whole game plan offense. Like this is what it's just about: sticking and moving, making adjustments and adapting. Halftime adjustments, even like not even just. I mean, there are in-game adjustments, drive-to-drive adjustments, halftime adjustments, in-season adjustments, bye-week adjustments. And if you were to go back
roster
adjustments, playing to your personnel or calling plays to your personnel, fitting your scheme to fit your players or making your scheme to fit your players versus the other way around. And it did seem like there was a lot more either square peg round hole or just rigidity with Bobby Slowick. Like, hey, this it was boom or bust. Either this gonna work or it ain't. But this is what we're gonna do. As opposed to this, seems like it's gonna be a little bit more so. Well, hey, what do you think about this? And what does this guy do well specifically? Like
something that we've come to find out and learn that was avoided in the locker room in terms of player-coach relationship last year, and as we in the last couple of weeks, we're getting CJ on First Take, we're getting Titus Howard talking to DJ for the ESPN article, and them guys ain't really mess with it like that. They low key. Now we just talking. They low key hated it. Yeah, and I think the direction this year will be more so of let me see what this guy is really comfortable at to get us over the hump.
Yeah, and like you got to have confidence in your play caller and in leadership, and if you get the sense that your play caller is either overwhelmed or in over his head, and then B, the back and forth isn't even there when you got something to say about it, when you got a suggestion that could help it or that you think could make it work, or at least you're not being heard or you need to be heard, like that's going to cause a little bit of, if not resentment, certainly some mistrust or lack of trust. So I think that they're starting off at least with that, in the beginning, and we'll see how it goes. I think Nick Caley is going to be much more of both. I think he's going to be able to balance much more of that collaborative tone and that authoritative tone at the same time, if that makes sense.
Let's dive into if there's any moments of clarity for you that may have happened throughout this offseason period to where you may feel like, you know what, Houston does have a chance to get to the AFC Championship game. More Locked On Texans when we come back. Texas fans, listen, we know that game day is here. A lot of times y'all not going to want to get out your house, right? It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on who delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. Well, for the Houston Texans who need to deliver, we'll talk about this. Yeah, the offensive line has been a storyline. Yeah, the lack of who's going to be out there receiver now that we know that the receiver situation is a little bit tricky right now with two guys potentially being out for Sunday. I'm going to tell you who needs to deliver, and that is the entire Texans defense, right? Listen, Matthew Stafford, I keep saying it, 37 years old, bad back, and not mobile like he used to be. And with that being said, Matthew Stafford last year, whenever that pressure got to him, the pass rating dropped, the turnover-worthy plays increased, and that gave teams an opportunity to really, really put pressure on the Rams offense. So when I look at who needs to go out there and be an MVP, it's not one guy for this team week one. It'll be everybody on the defensive side of the ball. And just like the Texas defense can deliver for the Houston Texans, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. While DoorDash has your DoorDash streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday, keep the streak alive, fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo code through November 18th. Again, promo code through November 18th. Texan fans, Brandon K. Scott, it's your boy John Hickman. We're sitting here talking about the Houston Texans. The afternoon game is in a couple of days, and it just feels good to have football back, Brandon.
Man, I cannot wait, bro. I cannot wait. Like, not even, I know we're talking about the Texans and the NFL, and we're doing this, ahead of Thursday night football and all this when we're recording this and everything. But I'm excited for all of it, man. Like, I was a little bit disappointed in week one of college football because I was expecting a little bit more from the marquee games, but I was glad to get what I got. I wasn't like, I was disappointed, but not ungrateful. So, man, like I am very, very excited about Saturdays and Sundays coming up this fall, brother.
Myself included. Now, for the Houston Texans, we get back to this Texan talk. So much revamping, newness, however you want to put it. But I think we can agree that for the most part, they did a good job of going out with the old and bad and bringing in a new and possible positive direction moving forward. For a team that will be banking on CJ Stroud going into his third year, 2 offensive coordinators by his third year, to just be a better version of himself. And nationally, I'm seeing him get a lot of praise now that Bobby Sloak is no longer in the building. Locally, I think that we view him how we view him as a damn good quarterback. Do you feel like he's a guy that this season, even with the added quote-unquote pressure, added responsibility on his plate, will be able to rise to the occasion and really raise the floor of this offense?
Yeah, I actually like the fact that CJ Stroud, despite having a fairly decent year last year, all things considered, like if you divorce it from the context of his rookie year and don't judge it on the scale of, well, we expected him to take off and do even better, or at least be the same as he was as a rookie, and for there not to be no drop off. If you judge it from that context, then okay, maybe you can be disappointed. But just in a vacuum, it wasn't that terrible of a year. There were some things. There were some things that felt like they were some mild regressions, and you wonder how much those regressions had to do with the circumstance and how much of it was just CJ Stroud and needing to be held accountable for some of those things that were happening. But they also really kind of feel nitpicky in the grand scheme of things because he was pretty good. Like, you tell me, would you want this version of CJ Stroud as your quarterback for long term? I'm gonna tell you yes, even with whatever warts you want to say existed last year, which again weren't that many. But I do like that he's going into this season with this idea that there is something to prove, even if there isn't necessarily that much to prove. Because I mean, the dude's gonna get paid. He's gonna be their quarterback for the long-term future, for as long as he's healthy and able. So like those aren't concerns, but you still got a little bit of chatter of, is he really that guy? And I think a third year, when you have 2 years that are perceived to be a mixed bag, you and I have already established that we don't think it was that bad and that he's actually been really good for 2 years in a row. But if we just want to go with the argument that it's been a mixed bag, then the third year is kind of when it gets decided. Okay, so which way is this going to lean? Is it going to lean toward the good that you thought of him or whatever the skepticism was? And so I like that he's going into the season with a little, I don't know how much he's internalizing that, but I would imagine that he is to some degree, to some level.
CJ is a gamer too.
As a competitor, you figure he would. Yeah. Even though he knows ball, so he also knows that, hey, he's not a perfect player. There are things he's got to work on. But he had a pretty good season last year, right? He ain't no fool, and he knows what he's doing. He knows the game. So, and most people who do realize that. But nevertheless, the whole gamer part, like what you're talking about, and the competitive part, like what I'm talking about, is in him. And so I like the idea that he's going into this season with a chip on his shoulder, even if that chip is somewhat overblown and borderline not completely valid.
Can Houston, and this is way too early, so I think since 2020, you've come on this show once a month at least, so I know you'll be back, right? That's how it's been. But a too early question based off of what our eyes have seen, and between the both of us, we got 8 eyes. Can this team realistically make a shot at the AFC Championship game?
Yeah, I think that's realistic. Now,
and I know a lot has to go right for them to.
That's what I was going to say.
The guys got to get healthy. Joe Mixon got to get back at some point.
Right. A lot has got to go right. Joe Mixon has to get healthy. They might also need some help and could use a little bit of luck. And I would say this before, like as a preface to me saying, yeah, I think that they could do it. There are, let's count them, at least 3 to 4 teams that you might pick ahead of them, maybe even more. You know, like I think we've done this exercise on the radio of like, where would you rank the Texans just among the AFC
5
contenders?
I'm going to go between 4 and 5.
Yeah, and I think that there's room for discussion on that, but there are at least 3 obvious ones, right? The 3 obvious ones, and then there are 2 to 3. There's a group of them actually that could be in that same conversation. What I'm saying is, the Texans are in a similar conversation with what I consider to be the second tier AFC contenders, right? I think there's a little bit of a holy grail of Chiefs, Ravens, Bills, and then the Bengals are kind of complicated because Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase exist and T. Higgins exists, but there's just a complicated thing going on there with Cincinnati and them not being able to consistently field the defense. But God forbid
players paid.
Hey, right. But God forbid that they do. And then that's a conversation. Like you cannot, what I'm saying is, as pitiful of an outfit as the Bengals are as an organization, I cannot dismiss Joe Burrow. So then there's that. And then of course the Texans are in that group of teams like the Denver Broncos, the LA Chargers, you know, some others that are on the come up. I think they're ahead of Miami these days, but like there are teams that are on the come up and are kind of in a similarly situated conversation as the Texans, but they're right there as a team that absolutely could compete in an AFC Championship game. The question is, how would they get there? Who would they have to go through to get there? Because that would determine a lot on how I pick them. Right, like if it's in the divisional game and they're on the road in Baltimore, do I feel great about that?
Yeah.
No. But if they win enough games in the regular season to get home field advantage and they host in playoff games and it's the Chargers, or it's like Chargers, Broncos, or they only got to go through. Maybe they got to go through Kansas City at home or Buffalo at home. You know what I mean? Like, and then got Kansas City waiting on them in the AFC Championship game or Baltimore waiting on them in the AFC Championship game. It would have to fit right. It would have to unfold correctly or in a particular way, I think, for them. But I absolutely think they got a chance.
I think with all of the hardships the Houston Texans faced offensively in 2024, if Nick Kelly can just make everybody else's job easy on that side of the ball, then they'll be able to use their experience of having to make things harder to be able to overcome some of those tougher matchups. Thank you guys for watching and listening to today's episode. B. Scott, please let everybody know where they can find all of your great work.
B Block Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and on the YouTube. We do that twice a week. We might even be doing a little bit more. Not gonna make too many promises, but we might even be doing a little bit more in football season. But that's twice a week. The B Block Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and also on YouTube. And of course, Sports Radio 610, twice a week. Wednesdays on the drive at 440. Fridays on In the Loop from 11 to noon.
He's working. He's working.
Had to get that in there.
Thank y'all for watching today's episode. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Make sure that you subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans YouTube page as well. Until next time, ladies and gents, Texan fans across the nation, football's back. You better act like it. Peace.